We ready to get into the land development code? All right, I'm trying to take a look at the documents that I have in front of me. Make sure that I have the right documents. There was the initial draft that we had posted on the board as was requested. Subsequent to that, there was some amendments that were posted by, I don't remember the order anymore.
So, Mayor, I have the set of what
I just want to make sure that I have all
out.
of them. I'm trying to inventory the documents.
I've got mine if that would be helpful.
I think I have yours too.
Okay.
So the ones I have are the initial one that was filed. Then I have one that was filed by Council Members Cr0nk and the Mayor Pro Tem. As I'm looking at that, it had some charts that were attached to it. Document. I have also a document from Council Members Flanagan, Harper Madison, and Renteria. And then I have a document that was filed last night by Kitchen. There were also some other documents that were filed for additions. One was planning that we had filed, and Councilmember Kitchen filed amendments to that planning document, and then Councilmember Kitchen filed an additional point number 2. I'm going to first have us deal with the 5 questions that the managers asked us to look at first. So I'm going to put aside my planning one and Councilmember Kitchen's amendments to that and the additional point number 2. So am I correct that there are 4, that those are the 4 documents that we have on the base thing? The original document, the one by Cr0nk, the one by Flanagan, and the one by Kitchen? Are those all of them? Okay. We've also received some comments from our staff. I think that was a planning document. I think this was just a document that raised the additional points, I think, is the planning document at the back. Okay, so those are the 4 things we have. And I thought we would just kind of go through this at a kind of at a high level, not parsing language, but talking about the issues that are raised, having each of these 4 documents in front of us, and starting at the beginning of the document and identify the issues that are raised by the amendments so that we can discuss those. Councilor Kitchen.
Just a question about process here. I don't know what time Councilmember Flanagan is planning on being here, but would it be appropriate to, if we're going to run through all of them, maybe it would be appropriate to just lay out the additions, which would give him time to get here, unless he's not going to be here for a while. I just hate to go through the main documents without him here, but you may have already made arrangements with him. So
I haven't. I mean, he was over there testifying. There was a proc that was up. He's texted back. There's a proclamation on the floor of the House that he's waiting to see. So he suggested that we proceed. Okay. And I just think that if we do it by order, not any one person's document, we could identify the issue, and then everybody could just talk about the issue.
Yeah, that's fine. I just didn't know.
Okay. So, as I look at it, as we're going through this, and don't let me pass any issues that are important for us to discuss, it looks as if the consensus was that in response to question 1, it looks like A1 seems to be what everybody seems to settle on. The question that seems to be really raised by the comments that I saw is whether or to what degree we're using draft 3 as the base document. We've had people that have described a challenge with respect to the redraft. People want a code that is simple and easy to apply. Some people are asking for I think we need to make clear as a council the degree to which we're comfortable with the staff relying on draft 3, I think is the question. Because if we create an expectation in the community that the staff is going to redraft something whole and staff comes back with something that basically builds off of draft 3, then people could be disappointed or confused. And I think that that's ultimately a question that we should decide on the dais, so that people know that when the mapping and the code comes back, they know what to expect. In my frame of mind, the way we had originally drafted it is we had the staff redoing both the code and the map, but working off of the draft 3 staff recommendations. Then they can then change that consistent with the direction that we give in this document. But I think that we should foreshadow to the community that people are going to be working off of draft 3. Discussion on that issue. Leslie.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. And I agree. I think I indicated that I was supportive of A1. And further, that the direction that has been provided, I think most recently in Ann's update that she uploaded at the end of the day yesterday, gives some additional direction and information to the community. For example, on timeline, she adds, in order to complete the mapping process in 19, if more extensive zoning map modifications are needed, then we work on those as well, so that the community understands that we understand that not everything may be decided, but the general heart of the matter would be decided. She talks in 3 about communication, which was a point of concern, I know, for Ann and I, and also for you, Steve, during the Code Next process, that there wasn't sufficient communication from the city out to the public for them to understand what we were doing, and making sure that understanding and apprehension was aligned with our work. So she writes in here, include a transparent and educational public process under which stakeholders are informed and confident in how their input has been received and is being evaluated. And I think all of that, in response to what you were saying about making sure that the community understands what we're doing, really moves us in that direction. And I think it's important to have this in here as direction to staff, and also be part of the public document so people know what we're trying to do.
And I have some questions about some of the specific language that you just made, and I don't want to parse that language right now. But I think at a high level, part of it's a timing issue. The more we're asking the staff to rewrite the code, the less likely I would imagine it would be that we could actually get this done by the end of the year. And I want to make sure that we set ourselves up in a process with expectations where we could get it done by the end of the year, because that also seemed to be what people wanted. And there's a push-pull in that. How much more you write and how much you stray from the code versus trying to get something done by the end of the year, I think is the push-pull that I want us to talk about. Yes, Councilmember Harper-Madison.
I'm sorry.
Natasha.
Oh.
Your light's on?
My mic was unintentionally on.
That's okay.
But I will say, while it's on and while I'm being recognized, while I can appreciate the time and the effort that's gone into the process thus far, including Draft 3, I feel very strongly about our need to start anew, with the exception of taking into consideration the feedback that was given by way of the general public. We can leverage those parts, but it is my understanding that the will of my constituents is to start fresh. There was a lot of contention, and a lot of folks were just displeased with Draft 3. And I'm new to the process, and I'll acknowledge that. But that to say, my interpretation of Draft 3 was that we can do way better. And while I can appreciate that there's a specific timeline that we're trying to fall within, I also believe that some of our direction for staff is to simplify the code, in which case, if it's simplified, I don't know that getting it done by the end of the year is impossible. So, yes, it's important that the timing of it works well, but given ourselves some limitations by way of saying it has to be done by the end of the year also sets us up for the possibility of not getting it right. So those are my thoughts there. And I'll turn my mic off.
I understand the question that you're posing about whether we start with draft 3 or not. But I want to just define what that means so that I'm understanding. So if we start with a particular draft, like draft 3, I would just I think that the understanding, at least from my perspective, would be that since we're not addressing everything that's in draft 3 right now, we're just hitting the top policy items, that when it comes back to us, there may be additional items that we want to address. So saying today that we want to start with a particular draft doesn't mean that we're accepting everything that's in that draft. There's a lot. And we have not, as a council, talked about a lot of it. So I just want to make sure that that's the understanding. I do agree that the staff needs something to start with. So.
That would certainly be my understanding.
Okay.
I just don't want people to get something back when the staff comes back in like August or September and go, wait a second, this looks a lot like draft 3. Or I expected something that didn't look anything at all like draft 3. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to true up that expectation, whatever it is now, recognizing that absolutely we have a community process to go through. The whole documents could change. Greg.
I'm at that same place of listing draft 3 as a starting point, but understanding, I agree entirely that we should simplify draft 3. I agree entirely that we should utilize the community input to improve it, and that it should be changed to comply with whatever policy direction we pass on Thursday. So I think we're generally headed to the same place, and I just think that putting draft 3 in there is clear that is what we are trying to simplify and improve, as opposed to going back and having to come up with something totally different, which I don't think would happen this year, because we know how long it took for them to put together the draft that it is that we have. So I think saying we're starting with draft 3 doesn't mean that we're doing draft 3. It means that is what it's going to, that is the baseline document that the staff will have to do lots and lots of edits and simplifications to based on our direction.
It's my understanding too. Yes, Paige.
I think the benefit of starting with draft 3 is that we can utilize the public involvement process that's already taken place and use what works in it and figure out what didn't work with it and where we need to head. So I think starting with that gives us a lot of groundwork that's already been covered. So that would be where I would want to start.
Okay. All right. So I think that's kind of the general consensus on that. As I look then to the next issue that seems to be raised by the amendments that folks have raised.
Mayor, could I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Just a process question. So, as we are we documenting that we have general consensus in an area, or are we just noting that, or are we writing that? Is someone taking notes of that?
We're taking notes on it. I think clerk's taking notes on it too.
Okay.
And I am.
Okay.
My hope is maybe based on this conversation to be able to reissue the document I did at the beginning with see if we can advance that conversation for Thursday. But the language that came by way of amendments that people were bringing them were all consistent, I think, with what we just decided. Some of the additional things were higher level statements. Some of them were kind of like value statements. In the first draft, I took out all the value statements and had us focused on exactly what the direction was so that we wouldn't be parsing value statements. So I'm going to be taking another look at that issue. Leslie.
So you've mentioned a couple of times about value statements in removing text that had been offered up, and then and I'm not really clear, I guess, on some of the text that has been deleted and then reinserted, and it's in or it's out. I wasn't seeing value statements, and so can you maybe better define or give an example how your interpreting a value statement. And perhaps when we look at the timeline piece here, the following additional direction, it's a direction on overall scope and direction on timeline and direction on communication so that everybody understands what we're expecting. Are those the value statements? Because I was thinking they were just really straightforward expectations and objective direction.
Right, and I think that one is.
Okay.
You know, to say we're going to do as much as we can in this, but we're also going to allow for future planning and future work. We're going to get that done, to me, fits with a direction statement. Some of it, but as you recall, where we ran into, where we were able to move forward 2 weeks ago, I think, was in saying let's not parse the language on just pure value statements. So I'm going to try to treat this the same kind of way that I treated the last one that I went through, trying to come up with something that I think reflects what people are saying. With the particular question you asked, I'm going to try to avoid going through and parsing all the language at this point. I think the concept makes sense, and I think it's consistently held that this is not an end deal and that there's going to be an opportunity to be able to handle additional elements in the future as necessary.
Okay, well then for process then, could I just ask if when you go through the document one last time or the next time, if you are going to remove some of the language like some of us have put in there, could you touch base with us as an example of how that may be considered a value statement so we could have some input on that?
Absolutely, and what I would do is since I can't talk to everybody because of quorum issues, what I would do is I would post a red line so that people could see exactly what was taken out or what was not taken out.
So I'm asking for something a little bit more specific. If you are removing language that, let's say, Ann and I had put in, and she and I have only talked with each other on that language, aside from here, I think you could talk to her and me about the specific language that she and I put in if you are proceeding to remove it again, so that we can, because right now we don't understand. And,
right. I would say trust me in this and trust me to get the information to you. I don't know that I can call you and Ann to talk about language in and out of that paragraph without violating the quorum rules, but I'll certainly talk to the lawyer or our counsel about that. But my goal is not to hide anything, and my sense is that I could do this in a way that doesn't seem like I'm putting thumbs on scales or trying to weight things as I tried to do in what I did 2 weeks ago. But if you can come up with a solution other than that, I'm all ears. Other than working as quickly as we can and trying to post something to the message board for people to say, wait a second, that wasn't a value statement. I don't want us to get lost in a procedural conversation about value statements versus direction now, if we can avoid that.
I just don't think these are value statements.
Got it. Noted. Yes, Kathy.
Yeah, I have a different issue I just want to talk about with regard to one. So we have talked about an expedited process here, and we've talked about the timeline. And I think I've noted before. I guess I would agree with the comment that was made by, I think, Rika, and because that's unusual enough, I'll say it again. I agree with Rika's caution, what I interpret as a caution about making sure that we're allocating the appropriate amount of time to do this well. And so I just want to note, I think it's fine to have a goal, but we need to do this well. And part of what didn't work last time is having a very expedited timeline that didn't allow for appropriate levels of public review, council comment, editing, other kinds of things that I think really improve not just the process, but also the product. And also, I just want to clarify, is the expectation, what does the language here mean? The Planning Commission have already issued its report on the new code and map. Is the expectation, should I interpret that to mean that we are not going to have any commission review of the land development code, of the proposed land development code and map when it comes back to council?
No, what I wrote by that language was saying that when it comes to the council in October, It will have already, as part of this process,
Oh,
gone
okay.
to the Planning Commission, but I recognize other people have raised
I
that
have
question.
gotten lots
so
of
I really
questions, so
appreciate you
I will try to
airing that.
I will try to. I think we should alter that language,
I agree.
and I'll give it a whirl.
That would be good. But I appreciate you raising that because I've heard that question too. The process we'll go through will be the normal process we go through with respect to ordinances. So it'll be published, there'll be community hearings on it, public engagement on that as part of the normal Planning Commission process. The next question I think that probably we might want to discuss through, I don't know, Mayor Pro Tem, did you have your light on to say something?
Oh, what Councilmember Poole was saying about taking things out, and you said that you would be, what document are we working off of right now?
The document that I would intend to bring up on Thursday, unless there's an additional document, would be the document that I posted back 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And then people can move to make amendments to that.
Okay.
Based on the conversation we have today, I may or may not post something else if
Okay.
I think it would help us move more quickly through that time.
Okay. So
But it'll be dependent mostly on the conversation we have. But the base document will be what I posted back on March.
So, for example, the document that Councilmember Kitchen just handed out would come as amendments.
That's correct.
So there wouldn't be red lines by you. They would be trying to add them into your document.
Well, except that
Unless I offer an additional document, which I don't know whether I'll do or not, and I don't want to get lost on it.
Okay.
And if it's better for me just to say I won't try to process that, then I could announce that now. But I'd like to maybe give a stab at it if I think at the end of this meeting it would actually save us time. But the base presumption is
Okay.
that it'll be the base document, and people can bring amendments to it as in the ASTP.
So I thought the understanding was we were going to work off your document on Thursday, and any new additions could be added by amendment.
That's correct. And now I'm trying to go through the issues that seem to have been raised by the amendments that people had. The first one was additional direction that would have had, as I read it, it could have had the staff saying, well, we're being asked really to really blow up draft 3 and to really start afresh. So I wanted to kind of raise that for a discussion to see if people wanted to back away from where we were 2 weeks ago. My sense is not. That was the first thing that seemed to be raised by the issues that people have raised. The second thing I think that's been raised in this section by people is in the code text area, and really it concerns NCCDs and COs. So I was going to call that topic up so we could talk about NCCDs and COs. Yes. Allison.
First, I just want to say that my focus here is on getting it done right, not quickly. There seems to be a majority of the council that wants to do this quickly, so I will just throw that out there as is where I'm at in terms of the timetable. For Part 5 on the former Title F-25, my concern is what happens to complex COs under this. So there are some COs that follow particular patterns, and hopefully the base code will address some of those things that happen on a frequent basis in a way that those can be easily translated into new code categories. But there are some COs that are very complex, that are not PUDs, that are not NCCDs. And in my conversations with you, Mayor, was my understanding that your intention was that those would transition over, but there's not clarity in this language. So I wanted to confirm that that is your understanding, and then we probably need to make an amendment to that effect.
I think that we have not really described in a way that's resolved either the NCCDs or the COs. I just, by way of quickly parenthetical thought on the dichotomy between doing it quickly or doing it right, I'm certainly not someone that wants to do it quickly and not right, and I don't think that there are people on the dais that want to do that. I think that there's a controlling majority that think that we can do this both quickly and right, and that's what that group, I think, wants to see if we can achieve. But certainly, if it's not right, I'm not going to support it.
And
but
I
think we can.
didn't mean
we can
to
both.
imply that that's where other folks were. I was just saying where my priority was, so I apologize if that came across that way.
Okay. With respect to COs,
Can I just ask?
Yes.
Oh, I'm confused about the order. I thought we were kind of going through the document
which one?
in the order, and now we've sort of jumped up ahead, and I have some things to say about two, and I know Ann has as well, and so I just want a sense of how we're going to attack this because we have like 19 documents. And
We're going to go through this in order. It seemed to me that the amendments that were raised by people with respect to 1 and 2 and 3 are things that we've discussed. If there are big issues in there, not parsing language, but big issues in there that haven't been addressed, then let's go ahead and do it. Because I was going to number 4, because that was the next one that seemed to have a big issue to me. We're already at 5 to 10. So I was going to go through this with the big issues that need to be decided.
Well, Mayor, I think some of us may. I would
fine.
like to. I know that my colleagues have made some suggested changes to some of these, and I'd like to understand where their thinking is. So,
That'd be fine.
So I'd rather just go through each one, and if there are changes, because some of us may think things are.
I don't have a problem with that. I
Okay.
started at the beginning. I'm going through it. I went to what I thought the next big issue was. But if someone thinks there's a big issue that we missed, then we should get the big issue before we should go. So, anybody else have anything in overall scope they want to talk about? Does anybody have anything they want to talk about in timeline?
I have a question on overall scope.
Okay.
And this is just really for council members Kassar and Garza. I just want to make sure that I'm not misinterpreting what you're suggesting here. I'm reading that to mean that in starting with draft 3, that when you start with draft 3, that the staff should also consider all the commission. Is that what you guys meant there? Pardon? Is that
Yes,
what-
the language says staff should review recommendations made by commissions.
I'm reading that right then. That all commissions.
When it says commissions,
Okay.
I mean
Okay.
commissions.
Okay. And then, may I ask another question?
Yes?
Okay. So then from council members Flanagan, Harper Madison, and Renteria, I think I'm reading that right too, but just want to double check. So basically all you're saying here is that, again, look at all the, so what you guys are suggesting is not to start with draft 3, right? Okay, so we still have an issue with regard to what to start with. And then you're just suggesting that you go back and look at, which is what you just said a minute ago, right? Okay, all right, I understand.
And ultimately, we have a vote on that. Potentially, if someone calls for a vote on whether
Okay.
we start with draft 3 or not, we'll have a vote on that.
Okay.
My sense is that the majority of the people in council, my guess would be, want to start with 3. If you don't start with 3, can you get this done by the end of the year?
Mayor, I think that we need to start with draft 3 as a baseline in order to have any chance of completing the task by the end of the year. I do, however, want to emphasize, as was stated, I believe, in the manager's March 15th memo, that there are a lot of revisions that staff are aware need to be made to draft 3 that are independent of your policy direction. It's very much staff's intent to endeavor to clarify, simplify, improve, and address concerns that have been raised by a variety of stakeholders. So although draft 3 is a sort of functional working document, I think is going to be necessary going forward, it's certainly the whole team and the manager's expectation that there will be substantial revisions, again, separate and apart from your policy direction.
And I think that's understood and covered by that language. Does anybody else have anything else on here before we go to the next section?
Here on the housing part of it,
Hang on a second. We're not to the housing part yet.
Oh, you're not?
No.
We're on 2.
I don't want to skip ahead to the housing part because we'll be moving all over the document, but we'll get there. We'll get there. I'm still on the front page in question number 1. Overall scope we've gone over. Does anybody have any timeline, additional things they want to raise? Councilmember Kitchen?
One of my suggestions on the timeline was that we just acknowledge that in order to complete the mapping process in 2019, and it's an if there's more extensive zoning map modifications needed to address our policy direction, that those would be adopted at a later date. after allowing sufficient time to complete any associated planning and testing. I just think it's important to acknowledge, and my intent here is that we do everything we can as quickly as we can, but I'm one that really wants us to finish in 2019 with our mapping process, but I think it's important to acknowledge that we may come up with policy direction that requires extensive zoning modifications, and that those might not necessarily happen in 2019. So to me, this language is important.
I'd want to make clear for me that that I want us to map the transition zones, and I want that done by the end of the year. So my hope would be that we would try to construct a process so that we could actually get the mapping of generally of the corridors and of the transition zones done.
And
But something that goes beyond that was larger than that, or things that were more appropriately addressed in district planning. That's why I generally agree with this, but so as to make real clear expectations so that they're just not an ambiguous where people could be reading the same thing two different ways. It's my hope that we're mapping the activity corridors and centers and the transition zones.
Okay, so then, so we would need to. So I'm understanding where you're coming from. To me, that depends on what policy direction is decided for the transition zones. There's been some recommendations that are fairly extensive, and to my mind, if that's what the council goes with, fairly extensive transition zones, I'm not certain we'd get that done in 2019. So we just need to mark this language as one that we may or may not agree on.
Okay. If we give you directions with respect to transition zones that you don't think you can map on this timing or the corridors, would you please point that out to us? Thank you.
And the other thing from my perspective is the public. In terms, if we're talking about very extensive mapping, then I think we have to understand that there may be some more time needed both for testing and for individuals to understand how extensive we're talking about remapping. So I think that's part of what I'm talking about. I think mapping transition zones is fine and is appropriate, and I think mapping along corridors and activity zones is appropriate. I'm just raising the flag that we need to understand, depending on the scope of the change, that we're suggesting that there may be some need for additional time. So that's all I'm saying. So,
and I hear that, and what I'm going to endeavor to do is my hope would be to participate in a document where the direction we give with transition zones is direction that can be done on the timing that we're talking about. Okay. And to the degree that we hear it's not, then I would probably want to adjust that direction. But I'm going to assume that, absent hearing otherwise, the direction we give with respect to transition zones is something that fits generally within that time frame. Okay? Any further conversation on timeline? Yes.
Would there be an opportunity for the professionals responsible for testing to be assisting staff along the way, just so we kind of can see it play out in real time and know that some of the scenarios have been worked on simultaneously?
I would hope that would be happening.
Absolutely. One thing we didn't want to do purposely was get into process, and we view testing as the process piece of it. But that's certainly what we did with the previous draft versions of the previous product, is use professionals to help us with that.
Excellent. Thanks.
And I think Paige is going a step beyond that. At the end of having gone through that process, then there was testing that was done with AIA and with other professionals in the community. I would hope that would be happening concurrent with the development this time, as opposed to something that happened after the fact, so that was part of that process. But that's for the manager's side of it. But I share the same change in the past process to have that made more integral to the process.
Thank you. And overall, I think we share the same concern, which is getting a document that functions correctly. And to the degree that we will include others to help us with that, we certainly will.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Any other questions or discussion about timelines people want to raise? Okay. What about the next section is the code text section? I'm sorry. Did I miss the communications? Anybody who have things they want to raise there? Is your light on? No?
It was, but you skipped over it. When you said, are there any other questions or statements, I do want to reiterate my position on not starting with what I believe was a document that wasn't functional to ACM. To the ACM's point about a functional document, and then also to just reiterate my thought around being quick but not hurrying. I think it's very important that we acknowledge those concerns there. When we use language like quick and we use really definitive timelines, I think it concerns people that we're not putting the necessary effort into creating a really functional, long-lasting, sustainable document.
Gotcha. Leslie?
I wanted to add a sentence, and this was in Anne's posting from yesterday afternoon under communication. A last sentence, include a transparent and educational public process under which stakeholders are informed and confident in how their input has been received and is being evaluated. And that builds on some of the comments that are being made around the table. And for example, Natasha just pointed out that we really need to make sure that the community understands what we're doing, which I think is what you were saying, among other things, to get it right. So that would be, I would like to see that sentence included under communication. Again, this was a weakness in our previous process.
And I like all that sentiment. I want to make sure that we're not building something in that creates an expectation that would prevent us from being able to, in fact, if we can get it right, to be able to have the document done by the end of the year. So I don't want to create an expectation. Otherwise, I think that we can accomplish all of this within the time frame, and certainly as things go before the Planning Commission, there's public engagement and opportunity, as there has been tons of it over the last 6 years. So I'm fine including this because I read this to say that this can, obviously, we learn from the past experience that we have. I think that we've seen some real good work with the strategic mobility plan and the table that was done where things were considered in all or part and where they could be found. I think we have elements to do. So I'm fine with this so long as we're not creating an ambiguity then that some people then rely on later to stop the process. Anne?
There's no intent to create an ambiguity or to stop the process. So if you're thinking that there's some words in here that might be interpreted that way, certainly could think about some alternative language. Okay. This language it tries to add some language that gives some more clarity to the previous sentence, and it's the transparent and educational part that, to my mind, adds some more detail. And I do think it's important for stakeholders to be informed and confident, not that they're being agreed with, but that they know that they when they're making a comment that it's been received and they understand what the feedback loop is. Okay, something as simple as we got your comment, we've looked at it, yes or no, we're going to do anything with it. So that's all that I intended here. It's not intended to mean that you have to have a process where we agree with everything, but we do need a process where people know how their input is considered.
And I'm fine with that, and I think that when the manager lays out his process for us at the beginning, he should lay out a process that it provides transparency and education and confidence, recognizing that that doesn't mean that everybody's suggestions get adopted. Sometimes people feel like they haven't been heard if their ideas aren't incorporated, which is not something that we can shoot for. So that we agree on the process up front that we're going to go through, so that as we initiate it, we know exactly what's going to be happening again, so that when we execute that, we can stay to the timeline. I'm concerned just because I don't know what transparent and educational and confidence means in this context, but I don't need to know that. If the manager is just going to lay out, this is my process and this is how I'm going to proceed, and if we approve the manager's process, then we know what the process will be that we're going to follow. Yes.
And I agree with you on that, but we do have to keep it very simple so people can understand it. when we went into the trans this and trans that, people just didn't understand what we were talking about. And my whole goal is to see this done by the end of this year and have it as simple so that, the normal person that walks this in the city here can understand what we're talking about and can grasp it. And I'm going to be as transparent as I can be because I know that there's a big change. There's a change that needed to be done here in the city, and I'm going to work as hard as I can to make sure that this gets done by the end of the year.
Great, thank you. Any other further issues to be raised in communication? Okay. What about the code text section? There were two issues that I think were significant in the code text section that I'd raised. One was NCCDs, and the other one was COs. And then Councilmember Allison also raised the CO thing. What I gather from how the majority of people have been talking about COs is consistent with what you said, which is that where there are a lot of traditional COs that show up a lot, I think our staff's intent was to start incorporating those COs into the base zoning classifications. So generally speaking, where that's happened, we can forget, we don't have to carry forward COs because they've been incorporated into the base zoning document, base zoning classifications. But to the degree that there are special COs that fall outside of that, then those COs would would be carried forward. And then if that property was ever zoned in the future, then those COs could be handled at that point. That's what I thought, generally speaking, was where I thought we would end up. With respect to NCCDs.
Sorry, did we skip over two?
What?
Are we on 3 already? Oh, I'm sorry.
We went through 2, 3, and we were on number 4.
Gotcha. Sorry, I had to
Well, actually, we're on number 5, but that's okay. We skipped 4.
Oh, yeah. Code text. Okay, so let's talk. You're right. I apologize for that. What about code text, number 4? I mean, my sense with respect to number 4, as I read it, is I think that generally speaking, this is what the guidance was that the staff was trying to follow in drafting draft 3, generally speaking. And if this is intended to go someplace beyond that or somewhere else, then I'm not gathering that. I mean, this talks about, trying to go to a form-based system, which I think we've generally tried to move in that direction, but it also allows for use specificity, which I think we have generally tried to allow for in terms of how we mapped.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay. So on the code text, I would like to just ask about the proposed additions that Council Members Flanagan, Harper, Madison, and Renteria were thinking about there. So I just want to make sure I understand it. So, so maybe, would that be okay if they speak to that? Mm-hmm.
I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but if you have specific questions for me and my particular intent with the amendments to the document, I'm happy to respond.
Okay, I'm reading this as relating to I'm not sure entirely what is intended here, except I think I see it as related to how use restrictions are done. So that's what I was reading, the amendment that you all were making, and I was reading that to mean that use restrictions, there was a range of policy frameworks, because there's a couple of examples given here ranging from incompatible uses. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding the content here is that there should be uses should be regulated depending on what's going on in the particular area or with the particular use. Is that really what y'all are wanting to do with that? Do you know? Or
So as I read this, my sense of this was that it was saying the use rules we have should be context-sensitive policies that get applied citywide
okay,
where it's possible, as opposed to trying to come up with use policies by deciding
By
what
area.
individual properties are.
okay,
To try to address it more broadly with respect to the kind of the zoning classifications or other general policies with respect to use.
And if I may just offer
Sure.
clarity from my, what my
Yeah.
intent was, overall the intent is to create more in the way of simplicity and a code that's applicable across the city, as opposed to us spending so much time making very specific rules around certain areas. I think that is where the complexity comes in. I think that's where it's not simple.
okay.
Okay?
Can I?
Go ahead.
So the reason I was asking that is because I proposed some additional language that that took the language that you all had and added a little bit more specificity to the uses, and that's on page 2 under land use and zoning categories. So I think I was what you just said is consistent with what I thought that you guys meant. And so then I picked up a lot of what you said with regard to that, and then I just added some language about proposing options for prohibiting uses along corridors that displace potential housing opportunities, such as self-storage facilities or other uses that do not contribute to overall policy goals. So I just wanted to point out what I was trying to do there was pick up the concept that you all had brought forward about uses, and then just add some additional clarity. So,
And I think the language that we used was context sensitive.
Yeah, I got that.
So essentially, I think we're saying the same thing.
yeah, I think I picked up most of your language and just added to it.
Yes, ma'am.
So, okay.
So I haven't had a chance really to parse the language that you have, and because it came yesterday.
Sure.
And I need to think through things like identifying hours of operation within a code. But with respect to the kinds of things, and again, not to parse the language, just to raise the questions. I know that we have. I'm not sure that all sites 5,000 or more need greater water quality treatment. I don't know if centers.
Yeah, I'm not talking about
could be
those
all
sections. I'm talking specifically about D, land use and zoning categories.
Okay.
So, because that's what I built off of.
Okay. So I haven't had a
So-
chance to run a red line back and forth, so
Sure.
I'm not sure what words you've added or not.
Sure, I just wanted to take the opportunity now to ask
Okay.
what they meant.
Okay.
So,
Greg?
I don't want to jump to my only comment on this was to make a comment as it relates to one of Councilmember Kitchen's lines on water quality, but I don't want to jump there if we're not there yet.
Okay. Moving past D.
No.
Yes?
So I appreciate the conversation around D. I think what I need help understanding, and it may, I mean, this is one of those things where I think we could spend a lot of time talking about it, and really until we see it in the code, it's not going to be clear what the decision is here. Because context specific, it seems to me that when we make choices about which uses are compatible with adjacent residential areas, we are making context specific decisions. And so I guess I need some help understanding are we suggesting staff do something different or the same? Because currently our commercial zones identify uses, and yes, it's true we modify those sometimes when they come to council, but I guess are we suggesting tweaking some of those commercial? How will this look different from what we currently have in our zoning code in terms of commercial uses being identified? Because I think the use of a property, I think it's not just about the size and the scale. Definitely the use in a property has different matters to the surrounding residential areas. If you have a small-scale grocery store, I think that's a very beneficial use. If you have a nightclub, where that has to really be managed in a way that is going to be sustainable, both for that business and for the residential areas. And I think we all see this in our district, but I see it all the time. So, the use does matter, not just the size and scale of the building. But it could be that we're all in violent agreement on that. I don't really understand if this is a change.
Well, like some of the CEOs, especially like when it comes to communication, these days now with the new technology, you don't need a big tower to send out signals. But say if you got a small radio station or that wants to transmit, they would have, because of the CEO prohibiting communication, it catches everything. Some of these conditional use, when you define, communication, then what is communication? What it falls into everything. Were they just addressing the issue of a high tower that was a phone transmitter or what? There's a lot of different. It's a catch-all of everything. So we need to define what, so that we don't have to pass resolutions all the time that, ask, that they can go around this conditional use on their property, on their land.
So some more refreshing of those categories and maybe separating out the uses, kind of relooking at them and making some different decisions about what belongs in them based on current.
I would like to see that because we really need to be careful when we start, just putting everything in one category. What is communication? Is it transmitting from a low-level radio station that requires a little disc, or something with a big old tower, or, with a phone? I see it that one of those, and there's other conditions out there that catches everything.
Okay. Any other? Yes, Ann?
In response to what Councilmember Tovo was asking, one of the things that I read this to say when Councilmember Harper Madison and Renteria and Flanagan brought this forward was just pointing out the importance of addressing use restrictions, and so I added a sentence that said that we needed to be simple and have clear requirements of conditions. And I just put a such as. I don't know that it's distance requirements or hours of operation. Those are intended to be examples. The point I was making simply is, we're all moving in the direction of addressing density along corridors. And when you do that, you have to think about the uses and how they relate to the residential behind it, whether those are multifamily or single family. So you have to think about how those uses on the corridor impact the residential areas. And so I think clarity, which is something we don't always have right now. So clarity about how these uses are addressed is what's really important, and simplicity about them, so people understand what you can and can't do along a corridor, or if you can do it, you have to do it in such a way that, noise is a big problem, dumpsters are a big problem. There's a lot of problems that relate to what's happening along a corridor and how that impacts the multifamily or single-family residential. So I was just thinking that that's really important, and it's a part of what we're talking about when we're talking about more density. So,
Mayor.
Yes.
And I forgot to comment that I like the addition, Councilmember Kitchen, that you posed there of asking the staff to also, as they look at the commercial categories and uses, of also screening out uses that we don't want to encourage on a corridor, such as storage units. I think that makes sense. I think that's a good addition.
Okay. Anything else? Move to the next category.
I have a.
Yes.
You had something you wanted to comment on.
Yeah, I think that's what he's moving to.
Okay.
Okay, we're moving to E now.
Yes, Mayor, I haven't had a chance to review and to fully understand everything within Councilmember Kitchen's additions on on water quality and water forward. I'm a big supporter of trying to incorporate as much of that we can this year. That helps us achieve all of these overlapping goals. The only one that I want to, just with my first cursory read, that I want to flag for us to potentially find some shared language on is that I remember from our previous discussions on water quality that sometimes just going with a square footage trigger doesn't always give you the best environmental outcome, because here having water quality at 5,000 square feet, having a 4,900 square foot duplex get built without water quality isn't necessarily preferable to having a 5,000 square foot fourplex getting built with water quality, because ultimately those fewer units that take up a lot of space ultimately lead to more impervious cover at the edge of the city that leads to sort of an environmental negative unintended consequence. So part of what I think was trying to get worked out that wasn't in the original draft 3, but something that was trying to get worked out as it came closer to council, was to figure out how it is that we both get water quality protection and encourage missing middle, given that missing middle is a better environmental option, frankly, than large single-family new home construction or large duplex construction. So we don't want to discourage that missing middle, but at the same time, we do want to get the water quality. So I think there was sort of some negotiation around how do we get to both, because that blunt square footage requirement sometimes incentivizes large single-family or large duplex, which may have made sense in previous iterations of the code, but we're trying to get away from. And so I don't know what the solution to this is. I just know that people were working hard on getting to one. And really, Councilmember Kitchen, I think our goals are aligned. I want to include water quality protection while figuring out how to incentivize more small infill units and not incentivize larger single, 1-for-1 or 1-for-2 replacement, if that makes sense.
And then and again, I haven't had a chance really to go through this, but I just had the same concerns. I think we're all joined together in trying to say we want a better water quality. So I have to think through the same thing about the square footage, the same points that Councilman Cassar just made. I can think of some I don't know whether it's an exception if you're in an area where somebody has 90% impervious cover, and we can incent them somehow or another to redevelop and drop it down to 50% impervious cover. Mm-hmm. But that's an exception for an area that requires 30% impervious cover. I don't know, but it actually net helped improve water quality in the area. I mean, those kinds of questions. And I know that we want to move forward with the water forward plan as quickly as we can. I know there's been some push-pull back between what we would like to have done and the time we would want to have it and what staff feels like they're able to do. And I don't want us to get into the middle of that discussion in this place. But obviously, I mean, I think that we're all joined together in trying to better water quality.
Okay, that helps me understand. I'll think through that. So.
Right.
And I would feel comfortable having direction that I do want the vote that we take this year to improve water quality overall and to reduce impervious cover in the city overall. And so I'm really comfortable having that, and I don't even think we actually have that in here, but I'm comfortable having that. And sometimes having really lot-specific rules actually inhibits our ability to get to that bigger goal, because water quality isn't a lot-by-lot thing. It's a much more regional issue, and so I think we can find some way to get to both.
I think it's really important that we hit those citywide goals as well. Ann?
We skipped over, which is fine, but I just wanted to point out the creative spaces and the age-friendly policies. And again, this is, I don't expect people to comment unless you already have an idea, but I just wanted to flag that for y'all and tell you what my thinking was there. These both pick up on policies that the council has already addressed from a policy perspective. So the intent here is just to ask our staff, as part of this code process, to come back with options for us. So on creative spaces, it says propose options to preserve creative spaces, including zoning categories specific to cultural space and incentives to create creative spaces. So again, I'm not proposing a particular solution or a particular approach. I'm just asking in terms of direction for the staff to come back with options. And my thinking is that we've stated as a council that preserving creative space is important to us. So that's why I wanted to capture that. And then the age-friendly is similar in the sense that we have adopted an age-friendly action plan, and there are recommendations in the age-friendly action plan that relate to land use. And so again, I wanted to ask for options from the staff. And I picked up and added to the end of this something that Council members Flanagan, Renteria, and Harper-Madison had suggested, and that was that additionally there should be provisions that enable daycares and senior living centers in all parts of the city at a scale commensurate with surroundings, because that fits with the age-friendly policies. Age-friendly policies specifically mention multi-generational opportunities, including senior living centers. So I just added their language onto that. So that's what those two things are about.
Okay. Any further discussion on that? Kathy?
Yeah, I need to go back to Water Forward. So at the bottom of the document, at the end of the document that I distributed, I have a Water Forward draft amendment that is in sync with yours, Anne, but may go a step further. I'm not sure.
Did you distribute it? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
It's at the very end. So I think so I certainly agree with coordinating with Water Forward to reduce water demand, but I think we need to go a step further. We have opportunities here to integrate the two processes, and I think it's really important to do so. I think it would be very discombobulating for our development community to launch a new land development code and then launch a new set of policies that relate to water usage. And so I think that these should be streamlined and that they should be embedded within our new land development code. And so my amendment speaks to that and talks about the regulatory requirements being codified and implemented as part of this comprehensive land use code revision process. And I think that's very in concert with certainly what I've heard from from developers, that they want a consistent process, a streamlined process. And again, I think the timing is such that it really wouldn't make sense to roll these out as two separate initiatives.
Does staff have?
I'm having trouble finding where in your.
It's on the very back.
I had put it at the end as addition. Okay. It's at the very, very last thing on page 6, but I think that in concert with where it's not clear to me where it belongs, and I think it might make better sense embedded within the section that Councilmember Kitchen brought forward.
Okay. Does staff want to comment on this now, or do you want to comment before Thursday?
Thank you, Mayor Adler. Brent Lloyd, DSD Development Officer. We definitely, the language, Councilmember Tovo's Water Forward language, as well as the provisions in Councilmember Kitchen's document in paragraph E at page 2, we would like to run those by Watershed Protection and give them a chance to look at those a little bit more closely, and we will do that in very short order. I will speak with the environmental officer and staff later today, so we'll provide feedback to council on those provisions as well as your amendment before Thursday.
That'd be great. Thank you.
And just to be clear, Councilmember Kitchen, most of your amendments, I think, came from draft 3.
These were recommendations.
Or were they also the flood mitigation, some of the flood mitigation task force?
These are recommendations from Clean Water Action.
Okay.
And I'm not clear on how many of them are in draft 3.
So, and I guess I may be confusing it with the conversations we had. I know these certainly aren't new to me, and I think maybe that's because they were certainly being recommended by people and looking at Code Next Draft 3 and the section, especially the section that dealt with stormwater use and whatnot.
Yeah, they're not new. I think they've been presented to us in the past by staff, if I'm remembering correctly. But
thank you.
Okay. Continuing on. Anything else in this section on code text that people want to raise? Ann?
One other thing, and that's the F that I had suggested, and that's related to transportation demand management tools. And again, I'm not. To me, these subjects relate to what we're doing. Because one of the things we're focused on in these questions 1 through 5 are increased density, so and parking. So I just wanted to suggest some language here around TDM tools, that there be a set of tools that can be used. My understanding is that's consistent with what the Transportation Department is planning, but the goal of that is simplification. So that developments that want to use transportation demand management, instead of having to customize them each time, which takes time and money to figure out, also takes time and money for the analysis, that they can work off a predetermined set of tools. And there's just some suggestions here on what those are.
So how does that work? Because I support that kind of stuff. Does the code have a provision that says there shall be a predetermined set of transportation demand management tools, and then the criteria manual can have those tools so they can change over time without having to amend the code?
Perhaps. I mean, the code does address transportation demand management.
Right.
So the way that you just mentioned it might be a good way to parse that. I would ask Transportation Department. We don't have to ask them right now, but we can ask them. Perhaps you can ask them for feedback on this also, as you asked water quality for.
Yeah.
Anique Baudet, Austin Transportation Department, and as discussed, that's exactly right. As previously with the code rewrite, we had the demand management tool required in the code as part of the transportation impact analysis process and defined, and then we were developing criteria that was clear and concise in the criteria manual. And we have continued to do that in the last 6 months in developing the TCM rewrite. So that is how it would move forward.
All right. So the next section then is the zoning map.
Wait, one more question. So I'm sorry. So would that? Am I hearing you right that it would make sense to say in the code that there will be TDM and that there will be a predetermined set that people can use? Okay, got it.
Yes.
Okay, so then the zoning map is the next section that we're talking about?
Sorry, I wanted to briefly,
Yeah,
in the code text, I don't know what the amendment will be, and if staff could help provide some guidance, but I wanted something, it says the revised land code should be sufficiently clear and unambiguous, and it kind of refers to the criteria manuals. I want it there. Maybe it's a family-friendly thing, but something specific to addressing the homestead initiative that reduces requirements for families that are just trying to stay in place. So I think that a family trying to remodel and add to their home should be treated differently from a developer who's just bought a vacant or a piece of property and is demolishing the house and putting 2 condos up. I think in those more, for-profit situations, for example, one thing I've often brought up is the sidewalk requirement. In those kind of situations, I do think the developer should pay for whatever sidewalk is required by our code. But when you have a homeowner just trying to add on some square feet, they're required to put a sidewalk as well. And I don't think that I just don't think that's fair that we're asking our homeowners to complete our sidewalk infrastructure because they're trying to stay in place.
So, Mayor Pro Tem Brett Wood, DSD, I think any language that would sort of distinguish among classes would be something we'd need to talk with the law department about. But fundamentally, having different requirements for remodels versus new construction, which is, I think, the essence of what you're talking about, is definitely something that we can look at. And I'm familiar with the situations you're describing where the issue is kind of for neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks, at what point do you trigger the requirement to dedicate sidewalks? And if you feel that the current practices or code provisions are a little over-aggressive on that, you can certainly, I think, frame some direction that would give staff the go-ahead to revisit those requirements. And we can, if asked, I think, we could give you a sentence or two on that. But I think that there's a way to get to where you're going, but definitely I think distinguishing among classes of people or families, we would caution against that.
Okay. I'll try to think of an amendment. Thanks.
Okay. Then in the code text, we ready to move there? Okay. We talked about COs just a second ago, about the zoning map on number 5. I'm sorry, zoning map number 5. We talked about COs a second ago. Generally speaking, moving away from COs to the zoning classifications, where the zoning classifications pick up traditional and off-use COs, but carrying forward at this stage COs that depart from that. I've heard conversation both ways with respect to NCCDs. This language generally says that PUDs and PDAs continue. NCCDs have come up as an issue. I would recommend that we keep the NCCDs. There are a few in the city. Was at Hyde Park, Travis Heights, and up in the 11th and 12th Street area. I think the consideration, because I think there are good things in NCCDs, that neighborhoods have negotiated design standards and those kinds of things. But we could certainly talk about whether or not, as an overlay to NCCDs, whether those areas have to also take transition zones or the citywide ADU policies that we were otherwise, it seemed as if council wanted to do, to liberalize ADUs through the city. So you would maintain the NCCDs potentially and all things that are in it, except you would overlay on top of that whatever we decide with respect to transition zones or ADUs, that kind of thing. Discussion on this issue.
Just a point of clarification. I mean, there are ADUs in at least the couple NCCDs that I'm aware of. In fact, Hyde Park had a more liberal ADU policy long before the one was revised here at the city. So if there are concerns about particular elements of the NCCDs, it would be helpful to know what are the site development regulations that are causing some of those concerns.
Greg?
So I think that you, Councilmember Tobel, you make a good point, right? That there were still, that once we did our ADU reforms citywide, some of the NCCDs were not affected, but frankly already had ADU provisions, but they didn't match up with the ADU provisions citywide. And so for me, I think the question is, if we F25 entire neighborhoods, then folks might ask, well, why does the transition zone end right here? And if the answer is it doesn't have to, that we can still provide some of the form and design protections and other parts within an NCCD, but any transition zone that we map still applies, and we don't just F25 that out, but actually keep design and form provisions, but allow transition zones to apply. And then if we change any of the base site development standards as it relates to single family or multifamily, if those can get baked in without disrupting the NCCD, then I can see how those could both coexist. I think my concern is with F25ing whole neighborhoods and then not having whatever we decide for the whole city apply in those areas. And I'd be comfortable giving staff direction to do both, as opposed to removing the entire NCCD when actually I don't have particular issues with I've seen the NCCD ordinances are many pages long. I think it's really just trying to make sure that whatever we do with adding small scale housing can apply in different parts of the city without being F25'd away.
I have a question about that. Do you have a question?
So what I was trying to propose was there were some people, I was trying to avoid a vote to strike NCCDs. So I was trying to come up with language that might be able to preserve NCCDs, all the design standards, the bulk of what goes into an NCCD, and suggesting that one way we might consider that is to allow for, in essence, what would be an overlay on an NCCD that would recognize transitions and ADUs, and to the degree that they already allow ADUs, then it wouldn't be changing conditions or whatever. Ann?
I have some questions here, because what I'm hearing you all say is to not keep the NCCD, because what you're talking about is changing what is, and I may not be totally understanding NCCDs. I think Councilmember Tovo may understand them better, but my understanding of NCCD is it looks at comprehensively at a particular geographic area, and so it would have addressed a whole range of things. And so if you're talking about overlaying additional requirements, you're essentially changing the NCCD, right? I mean, am I understanding?
It's being changed to that degree. It would be changed to the degree that it would allow for transitions and ADUs if it didn't otherwise allow for ADUs. But the bulk of what was in the NCCD document would remain unchanged.
But isn't the bulk of it addressing things like density in places and stuff like? I'm sorry.
It's addressing design standards and lots of other things, but to the degree that it didn't allow for the missing middle housing and a transition, then it would, and to the degree that it stopped the realization of density or housing on commercial corridors, it would.
What if it had greater density than we're talking about?
It would certainly be allowed to continue that.
So I would suggest, I mean, I think that I see where you're, I mean, this is an interesting conversation, and I think if we actually spent some time looking at the NCCDs, they're all different, and actually looking at their impact, I think that would be probably a more productive way to proceed. Because, for example, Councilmember Kitchen, you're right that these have, I mean, the NCCD in Hyde Park, for example, identified, and let me provide the context that these are like nationally recognized tools that are used in planning across the country, and they're especially valuable, excuse me, and what it's done in Hyde Park is encourage and identify areas for density and for ADUs within an established neighborhood. And so Hyde Park has a, I mean, we all got this information, though I'll have to look back at when they sent it because it may be that the new council members need it. It's the highest density, among the highest density neighborhood in Austin. Somewhere I've got some details about how many ADUs. I mean, it encouraged ADUs again before that became a city policy. It did provide for transition zones from the corridor and increased density in those small commercial nodes within the neighborhood as long as on the corridor. So, you know, I think if there were direction given to staff, I think it would need to be along the lines of analyzing it to see if it's providing any impediments to city policy goals. Because certainly in the case of Hyde Parks, you know, we've got a lot of evidence that it's not. It is, in fact, doing the opposite. And I think even Opticos recognized Hyde Park as one of the areas where we have a wide variety of the so-called missing middle. You have like 45 apartment complexes. You have ADUs on lots of lots. You have fourplexes. You have triplexes. So, you know, as we're talking about missing middle, and we'll get to this here soon, I think we need to have a realistic conversation about which neighborhoods have the so-called missing middle on the ground and what has helped achieve that. And in the case of Hyde Park, the NCCD has helped achieve that. Now, Councilmember Harper Madison would have to provide more detail. It's been a little bit since I've looked at 11th Street and 12th Street, and the NCCD works differently there as it does in Hyde Park. They're all, I mean, that's the point. They're exactly what we've been talking about, this context-specific site development standards that allow the achievement of aims without, you know, in recognizing the existing patterns of development and encouraging and enhancing them.
Okay. Any further discussion on this issue?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem, and then Natasha.
I think it would be a good idea to. I know that votes are expected on Thursday, but we've all said that, you know, there's going to be more direction that's needed, and I think it would be a good idea that to have a presentation maybe on NCCDs and understand exactly what they allow more than other areas, because for me, and maybe this is a misunderstanding, but most NCCDs are in affluent parts of town with very active, engaged community that were able to get these protections or these characteristics. And so as we have had a conversation about equity in our city, I want to know, why aren't there neighborhoods in my district with NCCDs? Why aren't there neighborhoods in Greg's district? I don't know if you have NCCDs. Why aren't there any in, I don't know if PO does. And so there may be a misunderstanding that I am not aware of, but it seems like they are in certain parts of town. And if we want an equitable code, I want to understand them better, and I want to understand why those guidelines need to still exist. It sounds like if they're providing more than what other neighborhoods think, then they wouldn't be affected by this kind of additional, I guess, overlay of the transition zones. But I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, because I don't understand why they are in some parts of town and not in other parts of town.
And Mayor, I would just say I think Councilmember Flanagan suggested that they may be very useful tools for, now we have established neighborhoods all across the city. I mean, 2 of the NCCDs are in Councilmember Harper Madison's district, so we have 2 east of 35 and I think 3 west, if I'm correct. I think I may be forgetting a couple that are west of 35, but I think they're a very valuable tool, and it's exactly the kind of context-specific zoning that is of value everywhere. I would completely support a direction to look toward other areas that would benefit from them. Mary?
Yes. No, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Natasha?
I want to echo several things that I've heard both by Councilmember Tovo and Mayor Pro Tem, and that I really need to understand better who's directly affected by NCCDs, which is why we sort of flagged, our language is sort of flagging the concern there, and echoing what Mayor Pro Tem said about equitable distribution. So some of the things I jotted down real quick is, I, in my limited experience, just sort of glancing through the 2016 audit report that indicates NCCDs inequitably affect the citizens of Austin and land use in the city of Austin. I'd like to get more clarity around who benefits, because from my perception, it looks like mostly longtime Central Austin homeowners. And also from my understanding, Austin's a primary renter city. How are renters affected by NCCDs? Is it positive? Is it negative? I'd like to, have a more thorough understanding of that. I'd also like to, really talk about, if we're talking about equitable distribution of the use of land in the city of Austin, then I really need to understand more. So you brought up the 11th and 12th Street NCCDs, and that's certainly extraordinarily complicated, especially because the direct result of those organizations, if you take a look at 11th Street, which was the result of the urban renewal process, and 12th Street, they were supposed to happen simultaneously, but look at the clear and stark difference between the development on 11th and 12th Street, So I think a presentation is in order, especially for those of us that are sort of new to the table, maybe getting a better understanding of who and where are affected by NCCDs.
Staff?
Brent Lloyd, Development Officer. We will, in advance of Thursday, among our growing list of action items, is to provide some general background information to Council on NCCDs. And additionally, just for clear communication, if Council chooses to keep NCCDs but provide sort of limited direction for targeted changes, that's definitely something that could be accomplished without having to rewrite the whole documents. And then, and we'll provide, I think, some more information in the background that we give you before Thursday. But NCCDs in Draft 3 were proposed to be kept through the F25 tool, but they were not proposed to be carried forward as a new forward-looking tool, not because they don't serve a lot of value, but because they're complex. They involve, a lot of them involves lot-by-lot zoning categories. And they do present some complexity in terms of administration. And so Staff recognize that they serve a lot of value, and that's, I think, one of the reasons they were preserved as F25 in draft 3, but they're not without complicating factors. So we will try to provide council with some information and options with respect to NCCDs in advance of Thursday's meeting.
Thank you.
And I would just say they're very, I mean, each one is different. I think the ones in your district were used to encourage development, and so they increased the entitlements. I mean, they're all very different. They're not monolithic. But I wanted to just respond to the question, Councilmember Harper Medicine, that you raised about how NCCDs are addressing renters, and just to point out something that I think I mentioned a couple of meetings ago, but if you look at the census tract that most directly captures Hyde Park, 78% of the occupants in that area are renters. In the neighborhood around that, 74% are renters, 70%. So it's actually, I mean, you cannot equate NCCDs with keeping renters out. In fact, it is one of the, I don't know that there's a causal relationship, but certainly all of that planning has created an area that is majority renter, higher than many other neighborhoods throughout the city and districts across. So, again, and I think as we think about how to proceed with a land development code that is sensitive to the fact that we are a majority of renters, I think Hyde Park is a. I'm not sure that we should be looking to remove some of the tools that have helped foster these environments.
I don't know that what I'm asking for is removal so much as clarity, and then
I wasn't suggesting.
Okay, and then more importantly, how are renters directly affected in more parts of the city by the application of NCCDs, and are NCCDs and other tools being equitably applied citywide, from a codification perspective? That's really my question.
Jimmy, we're still in question number 1. We're on 5, talking about NCCDs. We've been slow moving here, waiting for you to come back, but we're really going to start moving now. Leslie?
Could you remind me what the acronym NCCD stands for?
Neighborhood Conservation Combining District.
And then there's neighborhood contact teams as well. And neighborhood contact teams are associated with neighborhood plans. Are they also associated with NCCDs?
I think the place in the code where they're mentioned and called out is specific to neighborhood plans.
Right. Okay. I think the audit that was also mentioned here had to do with contact teams and not the NCCDs. But I have to go back and pull that audit. I think it was from 2 years ago to remind myself.
Ann?
I think so. I wanted to ask the staff. So you can give us a general overview on Thursday, but I think that what's going to be important is to really understand the impact. So I would be inclined to, so I think we need to have that so we have an understanding. I think that'll be useful for everyone. I certainly don't, my impression, which could be totally wrong, is that these were done years and years ago and are not so much done anymore. And so those of us that have neighborhoods that are perhaps newer neighborhoods don't have NCCD. I don't have any in my district, but what I don't want to do is what I wouldn't want to do is pass policy direction and just say they're going to apply to the NCCDs without understanding the impact. So, if depending on how fast we're wanting to move on that part, my thinking is we might need to say analyze the impact specifically, come back to us. Tell us what the tools are, which I think is what you guys were saying. Tell us what the tools are that might apply citywide, and then help us understand what's going on in the particular NCCDs. Because I think that they could be an example of tools that are useful for the whole city in some circumstances. So I just don't know, and I think I want to know that before I say that we should overlay the direction that we're doing right now, because what we might be inadvertently doing is actually not fostering density that's there on the ground now. So
I think the question with respect to the Section 5, Jimmy, in this conversation was relative to NCCDs. Some people had questioned the continuing existence. Some people were defending them as an important constructive part of the city. And I had thrown out the additional consideration of maybe we keep NCCDs, but overlay on top of them whatever transition zones or ADUs or I guess even preservation tools we adopt citywide so that they would also apply in an NCCD. That's the conversation you've walked into. Pio and then Jimmy.
Yeah, I really want to find out about the NCCDs because, Code Next recommended not to create any more, just keep the existing ones, and I want to know why. I wasn't involved in that process, but I would like to know why. The recommendation was not to create any more, so I'll be interested on the tools how things have worked in those NCCDs and what didn't work, so that when we do create a whole policy for citywide, that we can be able to implement some of those that did work, and the ones that didn't be we don't want to use those. So,
okay. Jimmy.
Yeah, and my thought on the NCCDs is partly what Councilmember Renteria said, but that they don't exist, but for a couple of spaces, a couple of areas, and we haven't added any new ones, and we don't, from my understanding, don't plan to add any new ones. So we should really take the lessons of what those did or did not accomplish, and ensure that we're not using NCCDs as a tool to opt out of the code rewrite, because the challenge that we face is big, and we shouldn't be allowing areas to opt out of being a part of the solution, especially when the whole premise of the code rewrite is that code written X number of years ago is not doing the job. Well, the NCDs were also written some number of years ago too, and so I just don't want to lock them in. And I get a sense that nobody is saying we should just leave them alone entirely, but that there should be a look at how do they fit in and what worked and what isn't going to work moving forward as a city.
Okay. Ready to move on to the next topic? Let's do that. Let's go now to question number 2. This was the question about housing capacity. I think there seemed to be general consensus with C. I know, Mayor Pro Tem, you suggested adding to C that it includes residential and commercial zoning categories, and I think there was a pretty broad consensus for that.
Wait just a minute. I don't know that there was general consensus with C.
There wasn't.
I read the language that she added at the bottom of that in blue in C is what I was saying.
Oh, okay.
I didn't hear that. What?
I was suggesting that Kathy's language in blue at the bottom of option C on page 2 of what she handed out that says that we'll provide greater housing than in draft 3 through enhanced measures to allow construction of additional residential units. And Kathy added, including adding residential to commercial zoning categories.
Which can go there or elsewhere. I agree. I don't know that there's consensus around C, but I don't want to lose sight of what I think is a consensus point that, just looking at the couple blocks within my house would yield lots more residential units than currently.
My sense is that there is probably consensus on C. We'll know when we vote. But certainly if people want to talk about something other than C or talk about C, now would be a good time to do that. Yeah?
Mine is more of a question. I had suggested that we select B with targeted C options, and the reason I did that is because to me it's not clear what it means for us to go with option C. What I was thinking in terms of is that we provide specific direction. And so perhaps this is just really a question for staff that you don't have to answer right now. I thought I asked this at the work session, but I apologize. I probably didn't. So I want to know if we're saying we're going with option C, what is the list of policy priority that is inherent in option C that we're not actually speaking to? So that I just wanted to, if there is any. So that's all I'm saying is I want to know what we're voting on when we say option C. So is that something you can provide a list?
Sure, and the list is actually in the manager's memo. So
yes, but it wasn't clear to me from the manager's memo. So maybe I need to be more specific on my questions. Yeah.
So if council were to just select option C with no accompanying narrative, there is a list of options in the manager's memo that staff would evaluate. It wouldn't necessarily come forward with all of them, but it would a vote for option C without any additional qualification would basically be direction to staff to look at all those various options, bring forward the ones that make sense, And if council chooses to be more proactive and provide actual direction in connection with option C, then we would follow that direction.
Sure.
Mayor, can I ask a question?
Okay.
So, all right. Well, then maybe I'm just not understanding. So, when I read the mayor's memo, it wasn't clear to me what all was in option C. So, because I was reading language that said, and I'm sorry I don't have it right in front of me, but I was reading language that said things like, option C will address things such as or including such as. So I wasn't clear if there was more to it. So here's what I'll do is I'll get more specific with my questions. We don't have to do this right now, but I'll get more specific with my questions and let you know where it's unclear to me what we might be getting if we went with option C. So
I think that kind of direction, I think it would be really helpful for you to do that.
Okay.
My understanding from the manager is he really wants us to take a position on A, B, or C on the choices.
Right.
Because he's looking for a clear direction. To the degree that we can, he's asking us to really try to answer it that way. But I think the questions that you're asking, what does that mean, and then what do those things mean, I think are real good questions. Leslie?
Well, I'm looking at some of the edits that were provided in Councilmember Kitchen's most recent update, and it specifies preservation of 10,000 affordable housing units, production of 100 permanent supportive housing units each year, with half of those units being housing first. And then it name checks the Austin Strategic Housing Blueprint 10-year goals with direction provided throughout the document, and I think that, and then also mentions the uprooted report down under B3, and I think that those inclusions are specific and helpful direction to staff and should be included. And then also, Ann mentions in C, the city manager shall provide estimates for the potential impacts of the new map on transit ridership as well as affordable housing goals. And you all include those items.
Yeah. So I think one of the big issues with respect to this section was the language that was suggested by Jimmy and that group for 3 units. It's right after the selection. It's up in A. 3 units for all residential zoning categories. You want to talk about that?
Well, I don't think it's that complicated, but the very reality that we want to be able to build enough housing, and so that means we should allow people to build more units. I think there's a point to talk about where the market will deliver those units. There's certain areas on the edge of the city where even if we zoned it for 10 or 15 units on a single plot of land, it's just not going to get built. When you have neighborhoods that were built in the last 30 years, they're not going to get torn down. I've got single-family homes that are getting built in brand new platted neighborhoods still to this day. They're not going to get torn down and be replaced with triplexes. But just as a baseline, we should be allowing 3 units on a site, and then separately on the other question where the 3 of us talked about the missing middle housing, referencing the 4plexes as well. Thinking about how it is that we ensure that the process defined in the code doesn't, you allow it in the zoning and then you process it out like we do now with a lot of duplexes where you only allow one type of duplex to get built and then you don't get the duplex. So I think this is a pretty simple element, just the 3 units in terms of base residential zoning.
So at a high level, with respect to this issue for me, I want to increase the amount of housing we have in the city, and certainly by setting the goal and asking the staff to give us a code that gives us the capacity to be able to go beyond, that's real important to me. We're also trying to make sure that we're doing this right, but also for me to try and see if we can get things right done by the end of the year so that next year we're focusing on kind of the mobility deal, so the timing issue becomes real important to me. which probably narrows down to a certain degree the field that we have to operate in if we're going to be able to maintain the timing issue. And then I'm trying to also figure out kind of just the shock to the system with the degree of changes that we make, and trying to get something that within that time period allows us to do something which is a substantial move forward, but isn't something that operates as such a shock that would then also disrupt the process or the timing. So I would probably try to address the additional housing units by focusing on the residential on commercial corridors, coming up with a transition zone that allowed for residences at RM4 and above in the transition zone. So at the very minimal it would be 4 units, but it would also go up higher than that to RM that back into that. And the way that I would talk about increasing housing supply generally throughout the city would be to adopt the ADU kinds of things that we've talked about as a group, and liberalized it the way the amendments have talked about the different options and variations for that. But then also trying to significantly expand the preservation tool that is in the current draft 3. That's pretty limited right now in where that could be applied. But to liberalize the use of the preservation tool where someone was given additional units, but as part of that it required them to preserve existing housing stock. I think that those steps could give us a lot more housing in the city. I would hope housing that would enable us to meet the goals we set, but also help us get this done on the timing that we've expressed an interest in doing. So I would prefer, for me, doing that rather than just adopting a 3-unit rule across the city, because I can hear how that's going to get played in a messaging standpoint. Again, Leslie, and then come back to you.
Are we good with the goal of preserving? We already have the housing blueprint goal of 135,000 new units, and the strategic housing blueprint goal of 60,000 affordable housing units. And then, are we also good with preserving 10,000 affordable housing units and producing 100 permanent supportive housing units each of those years as a goal?
I mean, those are all goals, so I also support those things. When I look at that, I'm trying to figure out what actually gets handled in the code. So the permanent supportive housing unit is a unit that's otherwise allowed by our code, but it has the wraparound services that are associated with that. So in looking at this, I think we need the space to be able to do those, but the code isn't going to tell us whether we get those things or not. It's going to be the things outside of the code that get those things. So this was new language. I just need to parse that so that I need to think about the wording on that.
Well, I think this is being offered as additional direction.
No, I understand that. But what I just need to look at the language well enough to be able to say that it's not the code change that gives us the wraparound services around those units. It requires the other work.
But I'm sorry, finish your thought. Mm-hmm.
So, that was my thought.
You done? Well, that's...
Hang on, Tim. Let me go to Paige, and then I'll come back.
I thought, were you next?
I'm sorry.
Jimmy, then Paige, and then Ann.
Sorry, I can't.
Okay.
Is it my turn?
Your turn.
Okay. So I mean, the 3 units on all residential lots is not... It has to be seen in context to the other set of policies. So... I agree with you, Mayor, that the transition zones and the corridors have to be more than 3, and I don't think there's disagreement from at least folks that I talked to about that. But I do think if we're going to talk about the complexity of the job we're giving staff, then the more slicing and dicing we do over the number of units, the more complex the code ends up having to be, and the more work the staff has to do. It's actually simpler to just say, well, we'll just do base 3 on residential zones, and then we can focus just on things higher than that on the corridors, as opposed to having the staff do both jobs. And I understand the hesitation too, right? But I still kind of come back to that the problem is big, and the solution has to be big. And I want to get us to the end of the road here, and I'm looking forward to hear what you all kind of lay out as alternative ways to get there. I just think a couple of key, simple approaches is actually going to be the fastest way for staff to do it, and that's just kind of where my take is.
I really like where you're headed with this. I like the idea, and as I started trying to see how that played out in my district, I started getting nervous. We already have a lot of single family homes that don't have room for it. We have flooding issues. We have traffic issues. So while I liked the idea in theory, it did make me nervous, and I realized I was more comfortable in a place where it was applied to activity centers and corridors and places with transit. Just kind of seeing that if we started putting duplexes in backyards, that we were going to have other domino effect issues, with impervious cover and flooding and green stormwater infrastructure, water quality issues. So I like it. I want to see it in places, but I started kind of looking at the neighborhoods in my district and not knowing if it would play out well.
And we have very similar neighborhoods, and
We
a
do.
lot of our neighborhoods have some pretty old school deed restrictions that the code will not undo, and
Right.
and SOS that applies to D8, and just the market forces that are going to determine that the brand new homes that got built in Avery Ranch aren't going to suddenly then get duplexes built in the back of them. So yes,
Yeah.
and I see that more as the market is going to determine the fact that those won't happen, plus the other regulations about drainage and tree protection and other things that will unnecessarily create difficult scenarios. That's why I'm more comfortable with a more straightforward approach, because I think the other sections of the code and the market will actually take care of that piece of it.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then Greg.
I just wanted to go back for a second to the goals. I'll go back and do some checking, but I do think there is a nexus with the code for the certainly the preservation of affordable housing units, which is the additional 10,000, and also for permanent supportive housing. So, but I hear your question about that, and I'll go back and check it. I also just want to make a note that I put this in as the production of 100 permanent supportive housing units in conversations and with the folks that work in this area and in understanding it better. That's too low. That's really too low. So, given what we understand now about our homeless population, so I will be wanting to amend that to either take out the 100 or say at least to address that, because we have more information than we put together the blueprint. We do now than when we put together the blueprint. And also, I do think there's a nexus with the code, but I will get some more clarity on that. So,
Greg?
I have comments on the goals section, but maybe I'm going to save those for when we get to the overall capacity question, because I want to be able to provide those comprehensively. On the 3 residential units allowed everywhere issue, generally from an ideology perspective, I think that that's an important goal, and I would feel comfortable really targeting that potentially to the place where we think we will get it. The place that you've identified as the urban core in your joint document, Council Members Renteria, Harper Madison, and Flanagan, could be one way of cracking that issue that you described. This is also a process of assembling, majority support, or hopefully even more than majority support. So trying to figure out between here and Thursday what 6 or 7 or 8 people could feel comfortable with. So I'm happy to keep talking to folks and trying to put together language on what could we get more support if we preserved the existing homes but added multiple ADUs. Does it make more sense for it to be in the urban core as you all have defined it in your document, because that's where we anticipate this stuff has transit access and would most likely get built anyway. I think putting those sorts of parameters around it, I think, could be what gets us to a place where we have a majority or a strong majority of council that feels comfortable tackling that issue. Because I do think that there are places in an urban environment where we currently already have 3 or 4 units, and it's not right on a corridor, and it's in some of our most beloved areas, and it makes for a variety of housing prices and housing types, and I think that's a good thing. But I think that the hope would be to find something that gets us a majority of people comfortable, and it might take some of those different amendments to get us to a place where we can get there.
Mayor.
Yes, Kathy.
Since you've raised it, I'll just speak to the definition of urban core that was brought forward by several of my colleagues. I know that there's an interest in making sure that as we're approaching the code, we're not allowing particular areas to opt out of density. And I just want to point out that that urban core definition actually makes it wouldn't apply to districts 1, 2, 6, and just apply in very small ways to most of the other districts. It applies primarily to District 9. And so, I think that as we look at, number one, high opportunity areas, which are, and I have a map I'd be happy to bring up when we get to that point if it's relevant. As we look at the growth concept map and the activity centers, I think we need to look through the whole city for places for increasing density. While I think Councilmember Kitchen, you said it best in the conversation earlier this week, which I didn't attend but watched on TV. We hope that Project Connect is going to be a plan for the whole city. We want to provide activity centers out of the urban core and places for people to live near those activity centers. And so if we are trying to live out the vision of Imagine Austin here, we need to stick to that vision, which provides transit opportunities and jobs and housing for people in various parts of downtown, not in various parts of the city, not just in our downtown and in the neighborhoods adjacent.
Could I speak?
Hang on a second, Leslie.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Councilmember Tovo. I have a map here that I'd like to put up. And that shows our Imagine Austin future growth areas, and it shows our corridors, and it shows the downtown area, and it shows how we're growing and where people are building. And I'm pretty sure that one of the main aims of this rewrite of the code is not to make it a static document. The code previously lasted for 28 or 30 years, is that right, Mr. Gonzalez? So
yes.
Okay, so we're looking at a document that needs to be flexible and to respond to whatever happens in this city 20 years from now, and we can't imagine really what that will be, and we won't be here on council at that point. So to the extent that we are trying to overlay all of our growth concept maps, our future land use maps, our strategic plans in mobility and in housing, and looking at where we have transit deserts, which I think I pointed out last time we had a work session off to the eastern part of the city. We don't have any transit in our plans, in our future plans, and I think that's a huge gap in our planning, and we need to do something about that. So I would be really hesitant to nail this down to making changes for density just in what we are today defining as the urban core. I have been following the changes to our city from the policy perspective out in the community for more than 30 years, and the downtown area and our urban core has moved outward since I first started following it, and I expect that will continue. So we have guidance in Imagine Austin, and we're working on trying to get our mobility corridors out to all parts of the city where people are living so that they can get around, and I think we should this new land development code has to be able to flex with how things are changing in our city. I can put up the transportation, the dedicated transit pathways, the potential transit pathways, commuter transit. I'll put this up next. And then I'll just end by saying I also hopes that we will be able to revisit our future growth map, so that on that previous map that was up there, that was determined about 7 years ago when Imagine Austin was first passed, and our city has changed in those 7 years, and I think we need to respond to that as well. And I'm hoping, really hoping, that the policy decisions that we make with the land development code in front of us will allow us, will accommodate the changes that are happening organically in our community.
Allison and Jimmy.
Thank you. On the unit issue, I agree with Councilmember Ellis and the mayor, and would not be favoring a blanket application of 3 units. And just more broadly, I want to add that for me, I'm going to be looking at the questions of housing capacity and how we get them through the lens of how we're going to deliver those 60,000 affordable units. And I believe that we shouldn't be providing additional by right entitlements without ensuring that we're getting community benefits, key among those affordable units, in exchange.
Jimmy?
I think it's important to remember that new housing is a community benefit, and there's an additional 60,000 of market rate housing that's in the blueprint. So we want to make sure that we're getting those units as well. Councilmember Tovo, to your point, the challenge that I think I've struggled with to think through this, where the capacity goes, is that, just speaking for my district, and I've got 2 major centers defined in Imagine Austin, kind of the Lakeline area and the Robinson Ranch area. And they are currently zoned for intense development. And Robinson's just about to start to turn over, but Lakeline certainly has had an unbelievable growth. I think there's a zoning case coming up very quickly. ZAP just approved that will add 1,200 units next to Avery Ranch neighborhood. So, for me, it's not, the conversations isn't so much about where all density goes. It's that I think we actually have sufficiently zoned in the regional centers that are on the edge, because the density is either going in but for landowner preference, which is not something we can really do too much about, is coming in soon. And so the real question for me is, is 2/3 is just a number, but the intent being that areas of town that really should be densifying and growing incrementally aren't doing it. And the areas on the edge that are identified as centers have been doing it. So it's more of a delta question to today as opposed to a total question overall. That makes sense. Yeah.
I guess I would ask if you have the numbers to suggest. If you look around you, say, for example, at downtown, we have thousands of new units coming online. And if, I don't know that that's a comment that's really based in data. And I also wanted to point out, just so there's no confusion, the city defines urban core differently than it is defined in the proposal that was brought forward by Council Members Flanagan, Renteria, and Harper Madison. And so, Councilmember Poole, I think you were talking about the city changing, but you have narrowed the urban core definition in such a way that it is actually smaller than the city's urban core definition. So, and I want to address some of the issues that I pointed out in my proposed amendments, but I don't know if we're still having a conversation about a different point.
Can you
Let's
just
go Greg, and then we'll come back.
say what
The urban core, sure. So just to be clear, I'm not looking at the land development code, so I'll ask the staff just to verify this. I'm actually looking at the quickest source I found was a Statesman article about soccer, actually. And it defines the urban core, and this matches my memory of it, but again, I'll ask the staff to remind me. It is 71 in the south, which is consistent with our colleagues' proposal, 183 in the north, which is consistent with our colleagues' proposal, but it's also 183 in the east as opposed to 35, and the western border is not, well, let me read you what the urban core is. 71 to the south, 183 to the east and the north, and the western border defined by MOPAC, Loop 360, and Mesa. And I think the area recommended to be redefined as urban core by our colleagues is, as I recall, Ben White, 183 to the north, 35 to the east, and MOPAC to the west. So it would eliminate whole swaths of areas to the west of our city that are high opportunity areas, among other things. It also cuts out, and again, I maybe it's a good time to ask our AV folks to pull up, well, we just saw it, the growth concept map. You can clearly see is outside of the boundaries, both of the city's urban core as well as the more narrowly focused urban core that's proposed.
Okay. Greg?
So we do have the numbers from the consultants during the Code Next process of how much is zoned inside the urban core as defined by the McMansion boundaries versus outside of it. And so currently, nearest equivalency is 40,000 zoned inside the urban core and 104,000 zoned outside of it. So about 2.5 times more is zoned outside the urban core than inside currently. So I think that it is not accurate for us to think that there is more zoning inside the urban core than outside of it that's economically feasible based on the best consultants that we could get. And I don't think that allowing for 3 units inside of that area would make up much of that difference. It would make up some very small portion, I think, of that difference. The levers that were presented to us to allow for more missing middle would sometimes add just a few thousand units. And here you're talking about, nearly 70,000 unit difference. Code Next Draft 3 zoned 86,000 units inside the urban core and 200,000 outside of it. So I do think trying to get to a better mix of inside versus outside makes good sense to me. I do think that 2/3 of it being within that smaller piece might be more than it is that we can easily do. But I do think getting closer to an even mix inside and outside the urban core, in this case as defined by the McMansion boundaries, but I'm happy to try to understand what the difference is in the boundaries as proposed in the joint document by my 3 colleagues, but it is the case that there is more zoned capacity outside. I'm happy to talk more about capacity issues later, but I just think that that's an important fact that we have before us.
Ann and Allison.
Well, a couple of questions. Greg, I think one of my, Councilmember Cr0nk, one of my questions about what you just stated would be to take into account the size of the geographic area. And I don't have the data in front of me, but that would be one thing I would want to understand. My impression, or at least for my district, which I'm more familiar with, of course, there's a lot more land area outside the urban core than in the urban core, so I would expect to have a greater zoning outside the urban core. So if you have data that you'd like to share with us that it relates more to the level of density, I'd be interested in that. So my concern about focusing only on the urban core is this. I do think it's really important that we consider density throughout the city. So to the extent that people have concerns that we would only end up with density on the outer edges, I don't want that to happen either. So I'm perfectly, I'm interested in some kind of direction that lets us look at density throughout the city. I don't think it's the 2/3 number, but maybe it's some other number than 2/3. And I think it needs to be based on data, not just a guess. But the other thing that really concerns me about focusing on the urban core is I think there's a huge misunderstanding of what the neighborhoods are in the urban core, and also a misunderstanding of how they're growing and what's happening to them. I really think it's very important that we look at the whole city. Because we have set some we've set some really ambitious goals, which I think are great goals, around affordable housing, around increased density, around I'll call them complete communities, so that everybody doesn't have to go downtown to work, that everybody they can stay closer in their neighborhoods to get to the things that they want, that they need to get to. We've got Imagine Austin, and thank you, Councilmember Poole, for putting that up. So to my mind, to then take, we've got all these policies that are looking at the city as a whole. So to my mind, to take some tools that we have and only focusing them on part of the city is just not going to get us where we want to go as a city, and it doesn't make any sense. And it also is, I'm hearing it being suggested in an absence of understanding the data about what's really going on in the urban core. And some of the concern about what's happening in the urban core that I'm most familiar with is losing housing that's affordable. So it's even more of a problem of building larger homes than getting smaller units that may offer more opportunities for missing middle. So I think I think the focus on the central core is something that I think is not appropriate. I think that we need to look more granular about what our tools are, and we need to really understand what's going on in the whole city. So.
Okay.
And one last thing, I just want to say, the kind of thing that Councilmember Ellis just pointed out in terms of looking at her neighborhoods and understanding impacts within her neighborhoods, I appreciate you saying that because that is the case everywhere in the city. It's also the case in the central core. So I think we just need to understand that we have to, and that's why, well, anyway, I've said enough. I just think that we need to understand that that is the case all over the city.
Dahlia?
I'm still trying to get to the bottom of the urban core thing because then Greg added a third aspect, which is McMansion, which is different from the two that Councilmember Tovo. So how does staff define the urban core right now?
Hi, Lacey Patterson, Planning and Zoning Department. In Code Next, when we were making decisions, we were using the McMansion boundary residential design standards as the definition for our urban core. So it included the general 183, MOPAC 71. It encompassed a couple of neighborhoods south of 71 between Congress and First, and then a little bit more up to the west. I don't remember if it's Mesa, but the McMansion boundary is what the definition we've been using to this point.
Okay. And I mean, I guess when we were talking about the ASMP, we all, I think the majority of us agreed that you had to talk about those two things together. And I feel it's the same thing. And this is the reverse situation. As we're talking about, we said we couldn't talk about the ASMP without talking about land use. And we have the opposite, which is still true. We can't talk about land use without thinking about the ASMP. And the reality is where we want routes now or not, we have to think about where the routes are. Where are the high frequency routes? And so I'm not so much hung up on the urban core part of it, but I would say it needs to happen where those high frequency routes are now. And my assumption is most of those encompass a lot of what is being talked about as the urban core. But for me, we need to think about where those, if we want people outside of getting out of their cars and using transit, that's where we need to put the density.
Hang on a second, Jimmy, and then. Yep.
So the data question is important because there is some data that I can remember being presented. One of those data points was that over the last 7 or 8 years, depending on what year the presentation was, the fastest growing districts were Councilmember Kitchen's and mine. So growth is already occurring today in terms of population in the outlying areas. And a lot of that, I think, Councilmember Kitchen, you could probably speak to parts of your district where you feel it. I know all of my district is pretty distant, and it is the fastest growing, our two districts being the fastest growing over the last period since the last census. And the other thing that I remember is when we did the North Shoal Creek neighborhood plan, that neighborhood plan said that over the last 10 years they added 0 population. So I take issue with the fact that there's not data underlying what we're talking about. There absolutely is data underlying what we're talking about. I also take issue with pointing to downtown as an excuse to exempt out other neighborhoods in District 9. Downtown is a special, unique place with special, unique zoning. And that doesn't, just because you built density in downtown doesn't mean neighborhoods that are 3 and 4 miles away get to opt out of this conversation. I also take issue with the language we use because it is very important that we are not using absolutist language. I'm trying, and I'm not always going to succeed, but I'm trying. I am not, and my colleagues that have worked on these documents together are not saying only in the urban core. It's not only, right? 2/3 is not only. It's a lot. And a lot of that is in response to seeing the amount of growth we've seen outside the urban core in recent years. And I think the challenging part for us in this conversation is seeing buildings torn down and rebuilt 1 unit to 1 unit seems like growth, but it's not, because we're talking about housing units. When I see development in my district, it represents a ton of new housing units, and that's evidenced by the data that shows where new population is growing in the city. So, the 2/3 and the defining the core, part of that is responding to where we're seeing gentrification and displacement, which we talk about primarily being east of I-35. And the fact that the majority, I think, and maybe staff could comment to the extent that it's a number in your head, the majority of corridors, activity corridors, are in that boundary, or some very significant portion of corridors in the boundary. So maybe a number that says some percentage of the units go in the core is actually covered when we talk about transition zones and corridors and other things. And when you add up all those things, it actually does come out to the same thing. And I just want to make sure that we're not, and if I've misrepresented anybody's position, I really want to understand, because I don't want us to do the thing that we kind of pivoted into in the past. And so I want to understand better.
Sure.
Hang on. I'll come right back to you. Pio.
Yeah, I had to cut off my mic because it was causing this feedback. So thank you, Mayor. The 3 units per lot, it's still going to be restricted of what you can put on your lot. I mean, it's some people have trees and you can't cut it down. You don't have enough space in pervious cover. You're not going to build a giant one single unit. And we're going to be able to use that for affordability. We'll just require one of those extra units to be affordable. And that's what I see. And maybe we should get the staff and come back and say about the urban core, what's the capacity of the urban core, and then come back and give us what's the capacity, and that we can decide on that. But, we're still going to be restricted on what we can be built. I mean, just like family 1 and 2, these lots are huge. Just like that case that came before us where that person had a 17,000 square foot yard and he couldn't build because it was zones SF2, and he had to be for his servant, not for, he wanted to build a house for his son. So we need to relax these rules, So that's where I'm coming from.
Paige.
Mm-hmm. As an apartment dweller, I'm really excited that my district does have that opportunity. I like kind of the expanded definition of urban core. I looked at if it is 2/3 happening inside urban core. I wondered how my district is able to step up, because there is a need for affordable housing units. We've got some already. Some of them are even near the Imagine Austin growth concept map at the Wyatt Oak Hill. And I think it's important that all districts are able to accommodate the housing stock that we need. There's also a big consideration of sprawl too. So I want to be very careful about this discussion of we are going to need more housing, I think, where you have more transportation, where you have more places to work and schools. I do want to make sure my district steps up too, and I know that's part of it, is allowing for additional housing in a lot of places. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear, that even though we have a lot of single-family homes, I like a connected, walkable lifestyle too, and I want to make sure that my district is also stepping up. We have, I just had a meeting with the demographer yesterday, and it showed that my district has the most growth from 2010 to 2017. The district 8 actually is the leader of growth, and I'm proud of that. We have a great district, so I just wanted to make sure that was clear. I'm supportive of more housing.
Yes,
Council, Lacey Patterson again. Staff just wanted to provide for this conversation a little bit of the numbers that Frago provide us. So for the draft 3 report card, Fraganese did supply that 1/3 of the unit production and capacity was inside of the urban core versus outside of the urban core. So 86,000 units were produced inside the urban core versus the 200,900 units that were produced for or that capacity was provided for outside of the urban core. Just so that context is in your minds as you're having this conversation.
Yeah, Greg.
So I think another key part of what is in Council Members Renteria, Harper Madison, and Flanagan's document is the amendment to go from between 2 and 3 times capacity to 3 and 4 times capacity. I originally had remembered some of the consultant's documents being in the 2 to 3 times range, but in having gone and actually looked back at some of their improved documents that I thought were actually better, that were getting Code Next Draft 3 on a better path. It actually was in that 3 to 4 times range. So I wanted to lend my support to that position. As a matter of fact, some of the improvements that the consultants were suggesting as Code Next went to Planning Commission got the affordable unit capacity close to 20,000 units, and had the housing unit capacity just over 3 times. So I think that apart from figuring out how it is we better get more housing capacity in the urban core versus outside and rebalance that some, I also wanted to make note my support of what's in your newest document that has it at between 3 and 4 times, just to make sure that we don't miss our 135,000 unit goal, which my understanding is we're already not quite on track to meeting since we passed the blueprint.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I'm hearing what people are saying, and so we may want to say more about this. I guess I'm trying to think about where we may have points of agreement. And Councilmember Flanagan, I didn't mean to suggest that you were only saying the urban core. I probably did say that, but I didn't mean that. So I just think that what disturbs me is the focus on the urban core as a criteria. To me, the first level policy is the transit, like Councilmember Garza said, the need to connect to affordable housing, and the need to make sure that we are looking at the entire city aligned with our goals. So I would be interested in language that captures that instead of, I view the focus on the urban core as arbitrary, and I also view it as missing a lot. I feel like we need to do more than that. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I'm happy to try to help think about language that gets us there, but that's really what I'm trying to say here. So it may be the language like you have, Councilmember Flanagan and Renteria and Harper-Madison, with a recognition that perhaps 2/3 is not the right number. Perhaps we ask the staff for what's the right number, or perhaps we just recognize that we want to make sure that we allow for housing opportunity all over the city. So I'm not sure what the solution is, but I just wanted to kind of go down to that and say that what I fundamentally disagree with is because I'm not hearing the policy that tells me that the urban core is where we need to focus. What the policy that I'm hearing is that we want it to happen all over the city, and we don't want outside the city to take more of the burden than inside the city, and I agree with that. I just don't think that focusing now, I'm happy to focus on that policy, that we want things all over the city aligned with Imagine Austin and our other goals around transit. But I am not seeing where that focus gets us to focusing on the urban core, and I think we're missing too much of the city if we only focus on the urban core. I think the transit priority and the affordable housing priority are the two key priorities that I'm trying to work towards.
Okay, let's get Natasha, Allison, Kathy, and me, and then we're going to move on so that we can continue moving on this document. Natasha?
To just sort of piggyback off of what my colleague, Councilmember Flanagan said, I think our intent behind the language with 2/3 was essentially to quantify majority. So while I appreciate your disagreement, I do think we should focus on the urban core, but focus doesn't mean exclusive, right? And so if we're going to, sort of talk about language, I think saying focus just means primary, but not exclusive. And also that to say, I do see the policy there, especially if we're talking about being in accordance with the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Master Plan goals of complete compact communities. The focus should be, as Mayor Pro Tem pointed out, in alignment with transit. So the transit options, the housing options, being aligned with one another for those complete compact communities does sort of prioritize the urban core, and from my understanding. And again, the 2/3, I don't know that the number is arbitrary so much as it was an attempt to quantify majority. And I'd also like to say that today is a very special day. It looks like she Nope, she's still here. Today is Lacey Patterson's 30th birthday, so I'd like to wish you a happy birthday, Lacey.
Allison?
Thank you. I find myself having similar questions to Councilmember Kitchen. I think the insight from Imagine Austin was that part of how we were to grow were to have not everything downtown, but have these opportunities. So I will be looking at the rewrite through that lens. I did have a couple of questions for staff because although I don't have all of the details straight in my head, I remember spending a lot of time trying to understand the capacity numbers with Mr. Fraganese during Code Next. And there's some vagaries of the numbers that we're working with that I think we really need to understand. And unfortunately, I don't have all the specifics, but maybe staff can get us some of the answers. So we have things that we are trying for that is new development that hasn't even been conceived yet, that we're trying to address with this code. And then we have things like PUDs and other folks who already have entitlements. And all of those numbers get mashed up into the same capacity numbers. And we have some really large PUDs that are not in this urban core. And then we have some PUDs that are in the central city that were happening at various times when these capacity numbers were being put together that were not necessarily accurately put into those numbers. And so I think that if we're going to talk about capacity numbers moving forward and even now, we really need to understand some of that difference. Now, just because a development has entitlements doesn't mean that they're going to build it, but someone who comes in and has a PUD, or some other mechanism, we have Miller, they have a lot of entitlements. They're not built out yet. We count those units as if they're the same thing as some piece of land that we're just imagining whether it's going to redevelop. And I'm not sure that those numbers are the same. So I think it would be helpful if you could give us a little bit more information to the extent you can about what we already know about our capacity numbers, slicing it that way, because we've actually permitted a whole lot of development. So you can say we're behind on the blueprint, but you can also say that with respect to the market units, we've got 22,000 of our market units since we passed that, roughly speaking. And so, the numbers matter. And if we're going to set this goal of 3 times, we really ought to know what we're talking about underlying.
Laura Keating with Planning and Zoning. So when Verganese looked at the PUDs, they would take just a single number for the build out of those. The one PUD that was not included in the capacity analysis that I know of was the Robinson Ranch. And so that was not included because it wasn't expected to develop over the 10-year timeline the capacity analysis was using. So those numbers are going to be the same in the current capacity and the D3 capacity. And then the difference, we could provide you more information on what those numbers were for each PUD if you wanted that.
I think so, but what I'm trying to understand is there's still a difference of how much do we already have in the pipeline that's, if a PUD has a certain number permitted, it's different in my mind than just this imaginary plot of land that we're imagining someone's going to develop in terms of the level of certainty about whether it will be produced.
So land that was going to redevelop, there was a feasibility analysis done on that land, and that identified the parcels that were included in the capacity analysis.
We may need to, I don't want to take everyone's time here because I think this may be a rabbit hole, but there's a lot of information that's packed into the assumptions that you're making that is relevant for our decisions here, and we need a better understanding of that data.
Kathy?
I think that if we're going to try to come up with a recommendation on Thursday for how much capacity should go in one area, then I would request that we have multiple hours blocked out so that we can hear from our demographer who has opined on this issue. I would like to have a full understanding of the capacity analysis that was done by a staff member that I've referenced several times that had different different estimates for what the zoning on the ground can yield in different neighborhoods. In some neighborhoods, in fact, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, Bolden Creek has capacity for 40% more units at the time they did this study. I mean, we have a lot of data to go through if we're actually going to make this assessment. But just, Councilmember Flanagan, I appreciate you inviting our correction of mischaracterizations, because certainly I didn't say anything along the lines of exempting neighborhoods in District 9. I did not, for example, bring forward a proposal suggesting that 2/3 of the capacity go in districts other than mine. And in fact, I think you may have missed this discussion of Hyde Park. I offered some analysis that was provided to me of the NCCD and talked about the fact that 72% of the Hyde Park, of the census tract that's most directly linked with Hyde Park, are renters, and pointed out that in a few areas when we were talking about the addition that I'm suggesting we make to make it clear that we want to add residential to commercial, that there were multiple tracts that I'm aware of, and I think if we called on some of the experts in our areas there are multiple tracts that are perfect for increased density. All we need to do is add mixed use to that CS zoning along the area of Guadalupe, that is a few blocks from my house, and then we have provided the opportunity for more housing to exist by right. So I again, thank you for inviting that. Certainly nothing I said, I think, talked about exempting areas, and as I pointed out, I think as we have this conversation, one of the reasons why it's important to have this context level specific discussion is because there will be impacts on all of our areas, and I think all of our areas should be involved in this. I think it's part of our task. But I would say too, if we are going to come up with that, some kind of I think that this is a rabbit hole, let me say. I think trying to come to a consensus about how much capacity should go in one area and redefining what that area is really takes, I mean, if we're going to do it appropriately, takes a real understanding of what's currently on the ground. You mentioned, Councilmember Kitchen, the geographic areas we're talking about in this newly defined urban core is very different from the outside areas. I mean, we're comparing apples to oranges in terms of what it would take to put 2/3 of the capacity in a much more limited geographic space. And it has it's completely outside of the context of what exists there currently. At the appropriate time, I'm going to show a quick slideshow of 9 of the properties. I think it's best in the transition discussion if we hit that today, but I think it also relates, when we get to my suggested edits with regard to missing middle, I'll show you. I mean, to achieve this in the urban core will mean the demolition of lots of existing missing middle housing. So we really need to be more thoughtful about these conversations, about how we move forward.
Leslie, you want to close this?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the North Shore Creek area just finished the neighborhood plan a couple of months ago, and you all approved that. So I wanted just to note that through that neighborhood plan, we've increased the density by about 33% from what it is currently. And we have a changing demographic in North Shore Creek. It is becoming more diverse and also older. There are more people who identify as African American, Hispanic, Asian, and other /2 or more races than there were in 2000 and 2010. And I know we'll be looking at a new census coming up. But I think the North Shore Creek plan was a really good model for how an existing neighborhood could organically achieve a 33% growth in the number of living units. And so it's not flat, but it is definitely more diverse and older. And that, I think, is a really good point to be made for how our planning efforts end up with the result that we're looking for. And then when Councilmember Tova puts up her little slideshow, I have 3 examples also of some low-priced or good-priced units in mostly Brentwood that we might lose if we were to push the envelope on trying to upzone. So when we get to housing capacity, I would like to show these as well.
Make sure we do that. At a really high level, if it makes sense to me, if we're going to get from here to there, that we focus on the elements that drive, so focusing on the transition zones and on the corridors and the centers, focusing where we can get affordability. Because I think there is probably some link to where you're going to have in the marketplace the best opportunities to get affordability and probably proximity to downtown. But probably working it that way as opposed to coming up with a theoretical number. It is noon. Jimmy, I don't know if you want to daylight. We went through the pulled items. There were 3 pulled items that were left. I don't know if you want to daylight concerns that you have on those. And then I would propose that we take a break and come back at 1 o'clock. And from 1 to 2, we do number 3. From 2 to 3, we do number 4. And from 3 to 4, we do number 5. Ann?
Mayor, that makes sense to me. I just wanted to highlight, before we move from 2 to 3, I could very quickly highlight a couple of things that touch on what we just said. If you'd like me to do that now.
Why don't you do that real fast, and then we'll go to
Okay.
Jimmy to close
So just
out.
Very quickly, I want to point to people's attention. These relate but are not directly part of our previous conversation. So on page 3, I suggested that under objective that we provide, the city manager provide estimates for the potential impacts of the new map on transit ridership, as well as on affordable housing goals. So that would be a data thing that would be helpful to us when we get things back from the city manager. Also, under the city-led testing process, I just added language because I wanted to tie back to the council resolution that we already passed with regard to testing.
Okay.
The third thing is and this may bear more discussion later, but this has to do with the issue related to the McMansion ordinance, but it's also the issue of demolitions of existing homes and replacing with another larger single-family home, which I think we have identified as an issue that is not helpful to our goals for missing middle. So I've made some suggested additional language here. Some of it touches on what Councilmember Garza talked about in terms of her family homestead initiative and so I look forward to more details, but making remodeling simpler and easier. But also I would want recommendations from our staff or options from our staff to do everything we can to incent additional units as opposed to larger single-family homes. And if we're going to, I mean, we can't prohibit that, but okay, you get my point. I think that this one is critical to what's going on, particularly in neighborhoods that I'm familiar with. Last thing is on the zoning map. I'm interested in asking our staff to come back to us with options and a timeline for mapping changes. It is not my intent to put off mapping. It's just my intent to recognize that we may need to use a variety of tools with our mapping, all the way from actual upzoning to perhaps future land use maps, or in some instances we may need to consider zoning upon sale of property, or there may be other tools. I just think we need to recognize that it's not as black and white as passing our priorities in one day and the next day rezoning the entire city. So.
Thanks.